It's the chains moving when I climb down the ladder.
Lost hikers, strange rituals, entities that defy explanation. This isn't your average campfire story. These are the top 10 disturbing encounters in the woods with pure evil. Starting off today, we are talking about the dark story of Richard Walter Bradley, whose tale is terrifying and set in the eerie woods around Auburn, Washington. Bradley, a 40-year-old with a knack for manipulation and a dark side, drew people into the forest with tales of buried gold from an old robbery. But, unfortunately, the reality was far more sinister. In a terrifying series of events, he became linked to the grim discovery of several bodies in secluded, forested areas. Bradley's grim saga began to unravel when police found the body of Brandy Blake, a 44-year-old woman last seen with him in the Game Farm Wilderness. Her demise was due to blunt force trauma, and nearby, authorities found additional human remains belonging to Emilio Maturin, identified through DNA testing. Emilio, who had been missing since 2019, was lured into the woods by Bradley with a false promise of gold, only to meet a very tragic end. The story gets darker with the mysterious disappearance of Michael Goman and his son Vance Lakely. Both were found with their lives taken in a remote, unmaintained road near the same forest, their bodies discovered a week apart. Bradley's connection to their deaths became clear when his wife was caught driving Goman's Durango, which he later plotted to destroy to erase any ties to the crime. This string of chilling encounters in the woods centered around Bradley's deceptions and brutal actions paints a picture of a man who turned the tranquility of the forest into a backdrop for his heinous acts. Next, we are talking about this story from Dr. Jim Danger, and it is one call that was way too close for comfort. When they were about 18, a group of friends decided to venture deep into the Apalachicola National Forest near Tallahassee, Florida for some car camping and to enjoy a few ice-cold beverages away from the watchful eyes of park rangers. They set up their camp and indulged in the typical antics of teenagers. Later, two of them went exploring and found themselves about 100 yards from their site across the main road and down another path. They immediately noticed signs that someone had been staying there for a while, large bags of trash and other belongings scattered around. Curiosity got the best of them and they stumbled upon an older man living out of his van surrounded by clotheslines and coolers with a beautiful golden retriever by his side. The man was very friendly, chatting about various spots in the park and giving directions in steps rather than yards or miles. He swayed as he walked, not quite stumbling, but as if he was balancing on a tightrope. The encounter felt very odd, especially the man's keen interest on discussing national parks and forests from their hometown. 2 months later, the chilling truth came to light. One of the friends saw a news report featuring an old man with a van and a golden retriever, the same man that they had met. This man was Gary Michael Hilton, convicted of several heinous acts, including the disappearance of a young woman on Blood Mountain, Georgia, and an older couple in Pisgah, North Carolina, and another woman in the very parts of the forest that they had visited. Shocked by the realization, they contacted the authorities, and they were soon working with the FBI, flying back to help investigators pinpoint locations and share details of their encounter. It was only after the trial they learned that investigators had found what seemed to be human remains near the campsite, a very grim reminder of their narrow escape from a dangerous man in the forest. Next, we are talking about the man in the mask. This story comes from Reddit user JWhite56, and it starts off during a winter break in North Dakota when they, a college freshman at the time, decided to walk home alone from a friend's basement gathering at around 3 a.m. Already bad news. As they made their way through the snowy wooded path under the moonlight, they suddenly noticed a figure about 75 yards away moving in the opposite direction. Startled by each other's presence, the student laughed nervously and waved, hoping to break the tension. However, the stranger, clad in a full-face ski mask and towering in height, just stood there, staring back without a word. In the eerie silence of the desolate woods, a chilling fear took over the student. Feeling a primal urge to escape, they turned and hurried home as fast as they could. The thought of the masked man following them sent them into a sprint, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and remnants of the night's festivities. This terrifying encounter in the silent, frosty forest left them vowing never to revisit those woods or walk alone at night there again, haunted by the memory of that unsettling stare and the fear of being pursued through the snow. Next, we have a story from the Redditor One Macabre Cat, and they wrote about a time when they were young and camping with a summer program. On the trip, they expected a typical night filled with s'mores, hot cocoa, and campfire stories, but ended up with a lot more than they bargained for. Tucked into their tents by 11 p.m., 3 of the boys stayed up chatting, immersed in the typical late-night banter of people their age. Suddenly, the night's calm was shattered by the sound of heavy, labored breathing just outside their tent, as if someone had been running for a long time and couldn't catch their breath. Initially dismissing it as their imagination or just a sleeping camper nearby, the boys froze when a frail voice broke the silence, pleading, "Please help me." The voice sounded like an elderly man struggling for air. It was unfamiliar and very unsettling. The bravest of the trio cautiously peeked outside, flashlight in hand, revealing only the lower half of what appeared to be the man's scabbed and pale legs. It seemed as if he had been wandering the forest without clothes for quite some time. As they watched in horror, the man begged for help again, but refused the suggestion to seek a ranger, cryptically whispering, "No, no rangers. They keep me here." At that moment, one of the chaperones thankfully emerged, his flashlight slicing through the darkness, and asked the man about his condition and how long he'd been out there. Instead of responding, the man just broke down sobbing and then disappeared into the woods, his emaciated figure a ghostly sight as he faded into the night. Next, we are talking about the mysterious figure. This harrowing story comes from a Reddit user who has since deleted their account, but this story left me with such a chilling feeling after reading it. They wrote, quote, "I was solo camping and was on a hike to my favorite spot. I saw what looked like a man holding a massive rock in one hand and a knife in the other facing me. This was pretty weird, but other bushcrafters have been known to camp there too, so I gave the standard 'hey man' shout and wave. I got a bit closer and it looked like it was just a rock. I laughed it off and turned around, starting to walk away. A rock whizzed by my right ear fast enough and big enough to really hurt me if it hit me. I turned around to where the rock had come from, and the figure I'd seen wasn't there anymore. Definitely enough for me to turn right around and literally never enter the woods ever again after that. Alright, glad that's settled. Next, we have this very creepy story about being watched. It comes from Border Trilogy, and they wrote about a time while camping deep in the forests of Maine when they and their partner experienced a chill encounter that left them uneasy for days. They loved the solitude of backpacking far from civilization, often sleeping under the stars or in a small tent, but one morning as the husband sat outside their tent putting on his boots while his wife slept inside, he noticed a man standing about 30 feet away staring intensely at him. The stranger had the eerie demeanor of someone who definitely didn't belong there, alone and far from any trail. Joking nervously, the husband greeted him, half expecting a friendly reply. Instead, the man continued to stare for a few seconds before turning and disappearing silently back into the woods. For the remainder of their trip, the couple felt the shadow of that encounter, half expecting the mysterious man to reappear at any moment. They pondered over who he might be and what strange set of circumstances led to him stumbling upon their remote campsite at dawn. This unsettling meeting in the quiet of the forest reminded them that sometimes the most disturbing mysteries are those with no answers, only echoes in the trees and the feeling of being watched. Next, we are talking about this story that comes from the Reddit user Ernst Egret, and it starts off about 14 years ago when a group of adventurous cousins stumbled upon the eerie remains of an old, burned out house in the forest. With the reckless curiosity of youth, they decided to explore the ruins. Inside, they found nothing but charred debris and junk. However, the real chill came when they discovered a cellar entrance outside. Despite the darkness beckoning them below, a growing sense of unease prevented them from venturing hunkering down. Instead, they disturbed the silence by kicking dirt into the abyss and walked away. Their retreat was short-lived, however. Mere yards from the house, one of the cousins froze, certain he heard something. The group stopped and listened. There was indeed a sound, like something clambering up the rotten cellar stairs. Peering back, they saw a dark, fuzzy shape emerge from the cellar they had left open. Initially, it seemed like a large dog, but terror struck when the creature stood on two legs. In a frantic dash, the cousins scattered in all directions, each convinced the beast was hot on their trail. One of them ran through a thicket of briars in his panic, tearing his arms and legs, which led to a scolding when he got home. Classic, you're in trouble when you're fearing for your life. Though they all escaped unharmed, the memory of that horrifying figure ensured they steered clear of the deep woods for a long time afterwards. And next we are talking about the Night Marchers. User Truvin wrote about while camping in Palulu Valley on Hawaii's Big Island, where a group of campers had an experience that left them questioning their disbelief in the local lore. After a restless night dealing with a couple of large centipedes near their tent, they decided to leave in the early hours around 3 to 4 a.m. As they neared the top of the valley and paused for a break, they looked out across several rugged valleys along the coast far beyond their campsite. To their astonishment, they saw 15 to 20 flickering torchlights moving slowly along the jagged cliff edges. These areas are known to be accessible only to experienced hikers, yet here were these mysterious figures navigating the treacherous paths in the dark with old-fashioned torches rather than modern headlamps. This eerie sighting brought to the mind the legend of the Hawaiian Night Marchers, ghostly apparitions of ancient Hawaiian warriors who are said to roam the islands. According to the lore, these spirits march in large processions, carrying torches and beating drums as they trace their old battle paths or sacred routes. Encountering them is considered an omen, and locals believe that meeting the gaze of a night marcher can bring misfortune or even compel the onlooker to march with them forever. Despite their skepticism, the campers couldn't find a logical explanation for what they saw, and they left the valley with more questions than answers, their minds swirling with the haunting images of what might very well have been the night marchers continuing their eternal patrol. Next, we are talking about a creepy alien encounter. Dashboard for Fire wrote about a time when they were young while playing alone in their room around 11 p.m. They witnessed something unforgettable that ventured out from the woods behind their house. Initially, they thought the figure approaching their sliding glass door was a neighbor due to its similar height. However, as it drew nearer, it became clear that this was no human. With its dark black appearance and rounded head reminiscent of aliens from classic films, and standing about 6 feet tall with a very thin body, this figure was unmistakably non-human. It stopped at the glass, staring in at them for what seemed like an eternity, though it was only a few seconds. The proximity left no room for doubt. This was not a human. After a short stare down, the creature turned and walked away with long strides, disappearing from view. They ran to scream for their mom, who didn't believe their story, and then they had to go back to sleep in that same room, haunted by the memory of the encounter. Now, as an adult, they still get chills and tear up thinking about the event. What disturbed them the most was the creature's calm demeanor. It approached and left slowly, as if it was just observing. While they believe in aliens, they find it hard to accept that one might visit Earth. The incident, which seems straight out of a sighting of what many call a gray alien, has left them deeply unsettled, struggling to reconcile their experience with their skepticism of extraterrestrial visits. Next, we are talking about this weird, mysterious sound. A few years ago, an archaeologist and their boss were deep in the forests of interior British Columbia, wrapping up some final checks on a survey site. They ventured far from civilization, following deactivated logging routes to a remote area where they had previously found an archaeological site. As they worked, the entire atmosphere of the forest seemed to shift, feeling unsettlingly strange. Suddenly, a bizarre and loud whomp sound echoed through the trees, a noise so powerful it pressured their ears and chests, making them feel as if they were being compressed by the air itself. The archaeologist looked over to see their boss, about 20 feet away, turned pale, staring back in absolute shock. When the sound struck again, chilling them to the bone and raising every hair on end, the boss immediately decided it was time to leave. They hastily packed their equipment and hurried back to their truck without a word. To this day, the archaeologist gets chills just thinking about it, and despite various theories, the source of that terrifying sound remains a mystery, reminiscent of the forceful whoosh of a large bird's wings, but far louder and more intense. To this day, there honestly hasn't been a very solid explanation of what that sound might have been. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again soon. Bye!